So there's a big Texas rancher guy, a really wealthy guy, had this huge swimming pool in his backyard, Olympic-sized swimming pool. And he thought it'd be awesome to throw this big party. And he had a pool party and a bunch of friends over, but he filled his swimming pool with sharks. And he offered $25,000 to the first person who could swim from one end of the pool to the other. And nobody was taking him up on his offer. And then all of a sudden he heard splash, and a guy was just taking off swimming like Michael Phelps through this Olympic-sized swimming pool. He made it to the other end in a split second, it seemed like. And he got out the other side, and the guy said, wow, you are awesome. Here's your $25,000. How in the world did you do that? He goes, man, the guy I came with pushed me in. So sometimes when we have events like this, sometimes we'll have people among us who may kind of feel like that guy who was pushed into the other end of the swimming pool with a bunch of sharks. And that's no joke. I mean, for some people, this is a major thing to come together in a church group. So keep that in mind. I hope none of you feel like that, but we don't want anybody to feel like they're in the midst of a bunch of sharks when they come out and join us. But I have had people who've been a part of classes I've done like this who felt that way. And they stuck with it, and sometimes it was, really awkward for them. One young lady, I remember, never forget, she had been in prison for a little while. She had lost her kids for a little while. They had to stay with Grandma and Grandpa. She got out of jail, and she moved to the community where Grandma and Grandpa lived from New York. And she was struggling with drug addiction and has struggled mightily off and on since I first met her. And the first time she came to church, she came to a church service because her mom and dad, or actually her stepmother, they started coming to church out of desperation because they had these grandkids. They didn't, what in the world are we going to do now? So they got desperate enough to come to church on a Christmas Eve. And they kept coming. And then when she got out of jail, she started coming. And she'd come every once in a while, but she came to a class like this that I did one time, and we're sitting around talking after the main talk or whatever, and having the discussion part of it. And she just shared that she felt like the first time she stepped into church, she wondered, is it going to just collapse on me, or is the earth going to open up and swallow me up or something, when she came. So hopefully nobody will feel that way, but I'm glad you're here, and we are going to get into some pretty cool stuff. Well, we live in a day and time of major skepticism on steroids today. And the verse of Scripture I had in mind, if you look at John chapter 11, Jesus is here waiting to go to the tomb of his friend Lazarus, who passed away. He'd been dead for a few days already. And in the midst of this death of a close friend and a brother of very close disciples that he had, Mary and Martha, Jesus made this statement. He made this statement to Martha. He said, I am the resurrection and the life. Verse 25. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Then he asked this question, this wonderful, just simple question, do you believe this? That is an incredibly important question. Incredibly important question. Do you believe this? Now, we live in an incredible time of skepticism. We have militant atheists who have overtaken our culture and our country in many ways. The First Amendment has been turned on its head, and it's actually been established. There's a particular worldview and faith that has become the established worldview and faith of our country, contrary to the First Amendment, although it doesn't necessarily technically fall under the label of religion, it is still a faith, it's still a belief system. And it's a secular, humanist, atheistic belief system. And in America today, that has become the established faith of our country. And we are free to be pagan, to be unbelievers, but we're becoming less and less free to be believers. And it's going to be harder and harder to be believers. And there are atheists who despise Christianity. There are atheists who despise Christianity so much that they think the only reason anybody could believe in this is because they're either mad, in the sense of crazy, mad, sad, or bad, even. This is the way Alistair McGrath, who was an atheist, socialist atheist, before he became a Christian. He's a great defender of the faith today, and I'll talk a little bit about his testimony in a minute. But he says that the militant atheists today either think you're mad, out of your mind, or you just need a crutch, you're just so miserable and sad that you just need this extra crutch, or that you're just a bad person. And there are people all around us right here that live around us right here, even in the country right here, who think that way. They've been trained through the media, they've been trained through the culture and the programs that they watch. Pay attention to the shows sometimes, to the movies. If you pay close attention, and Christy can, I start analyzing stuff, Christy was like, man, just watch the movie. But think about the way, especially conservative, Orthodox Christians are often portrayed in some of these shows, either backwards, ignorant, or in some cases even evil. I remember, I was exercising. Anybody ever exercise your thumb, guys? I've got a strong thumb. I exercise my thumb with that remote control. And I flip through channels, and that drives my wife crazy sometimes too. And I'm flipping through channels, and sometimes you come across something, you just start watching it to see what's going on. And I catch this, it's sort of a scary type movie, but I kind of pick up real quick on, it's a scary movie that's portrayed the Christian family as some kind of psychopathic family. And I can go back and think about, there's a movie back in the 90s with Lawrence Fishburne in it, and the serial killer in the movie was some kind of kooky, Bible-thumping Christian. So that has seeped deeply into the psyche of our culture. And they think that Christianity is not only silly, but it's bad. And if we could just get rid of it. I've got a friend in Winston-Salem. I worked with her at the Mount area several years ago now. And she's like, if we could get rid of religion, everything would be okay. I'm like, Terry, are you nuts? Think about this for a minute. Think about just the most recent history. Who has been responsible in the history of the world for the most mass murders in the last 100 years? It would be atheist secular regimes, hands down. Hands down. Nazis, Bolsheviks, communists, all over the globe. Militant atheist secularist regimes. Che Guevara running all over the world, this Cuban partner of Fidel Castro, running all over the world in his day and time, trying to start World War III intentionally. Was it because of his Christian faith? No, he had none. He had a secularized, atheistic faith. It was a faith, no doubt. But when you think about the influence of Christianity, sure, there's bad Christians because there's bad people. We're all a mixed bag sometimes. But this is the deal. Christianity has given us things like hospitals. Anybody appreciate hospitals?
Yes.
Isn't it a wonderful thing? It comes from the word hospitality. And that is a tenet of the Christian faith, deeply ingrained in the Christian faith, is to show hospitality. And to not only just to be kind and gracious host of guests coming over to your house, but to help take care of people who are in serious need. Hospitals built all over this country as Christianity spread throughout the country. Think about, why did we abolish slavery? Who spearheaded the abolition movement? It was Christians. John Wesley, the founder of our faith, our Methodist Church, was an adamant abolitionist. Not in spite of what the Bible teaches, but because of what the Bible teaches. A lot of people don't realize this. In the 1784, when you could become a member of the Methodist Church for the first time, when the Methodist Episcopal Church was first formed, John Wesley's general rules would not allow a slaveholder to become a member of in 1784. Now that was compromised later to go along and to compromise with the culture, but that was not the original vision of Methodism. It wasn't the original vision of Francis Asbury, the first bishop of the Methodist Church. And if someone were to ask me, well, where would you point to as the beginning of the end of slavery in America and in Europe? William Wilberforce. Have anybody heard of him? There's a movie about his life called Amazing Grace. The last letter that John Wesley ever wrote was to William Wilberforce to encourage him in his fight to have the slave trade abolished in England. That was the last letter, and it was to this guy, William Wilberforce, who fought for over 30 years to have the slave trade abolished in England, and eventually was abolished. It was because of his Christian faith. But that was in the 1700s. If someone were to ask me, what would you point to as the point in history when slavery really was the beginning, when it was really the beginning of the end of slavery as we knew it? I say Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter, people, you may look at you like you're crazy, but I'm serious. Genesis chapter 1. And if you look, you go back and look right now. Chapter 1, you know the verse probably if I quote it to you. Verses 26 through 28. God said, let us make man, human beings, in our image and after our likeness. And God created them male and female in His image and in His likeness. Well, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? That's just a silly verse out of Genesis, this silly little passage in the Bible. What's the big deal about that? Well, if you actually compare Genesis 1 with another story that was told by the Babylonians in about the same time period, the Babylonians says human beings were created on the sixth day as well. But they were created as sort of like an afterthought of the gods. And in Genesis, the God of the Bible deliberately created human beings intentionally. But in the pagan story, the Babylonian story, the gods really just kind of created human beings sort of as an afterthought. And that afterthought was, hey, you know, we could use some servants. We could use some slaves. So human beings were created to be slaves of the gods. And not only the gods in heaven, but the gods who reigned on earth, like Pharaoh. And Genesis comes along and says, God, the true God, the one God, who created all the heavens and the earth, He created human beings in His image and His likeness to have dominion, to reign under Him. That was the beginning of the end. Now that gets pretty deep real quick, but think that through. That's powerful. That's really powerful. So the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s to abolish discrimination against people because of the color of their skin. Who led that? Who inspired that movement? Christians.
Well, don't you think there's something different between Christianity and religion?
There's a difference between having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ and truly walking with God and just being a nominal Christian by name and using the Christian faith for other reasons, absolutely. But Christianity has been a major, wonderful, positive influence in the world, and we should never forget that. And we should not take that for granted as believers. If we're already believers, we shouldn't take that for granted. And we shouldn't be fooled by all of the propaganda that tries to make Christianity look bad. There is an agenda, and we have to realize that. But anyway, So unbelief is very prevalent. Skepticism is very prevalent about the Christian faith in our culture, in our society, among unbelievers, among those outside the church. But I have had church members. I can think of one now. I remember going to his house and I could see him. We were actually going over, it was for a Christmas get-together. Me and some other folks from the church were just pulling up and getting out of the vehicle together. And we could see Dan sitting in the window in his recliner. He was asleep. He was just conked out. He was laid back. We could see him in the window. It's pretty as a picture. He was snoozing. And we were kind of joking about it on the way in. I said, yeah, it's because he stayed awake at church today. He's having to catch up on his sleep. But Dan was in the choir. Dan was someone who taught Sunday school. He'd been in the church for years, and there were others. But he had serious, serious doubts about the Christian faith. And in conversations with him and others like him, he would say things like, well, you know, this is just a bunch of stories. We were sitting there one night in his living room, we were talking, and Dan said, yeah, you know, this stuff's just a bunch of stories. He said, you know, Jesus really probably had a family. He probably was married. Probably married Mary Magdalene, and they went off and had children together. So I said, Dan, have you been reading? There's another guy named Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. He said, oh no. I looked over on the shelf. Guess what the first book is I saw on the shelf? And this book that was written to promote this story that, well, Jesus was just this was a person who has been in church and the choir, teaching Sunday school his whole life. Sitting in a Bible study, a men's group, my home church. And it was right before Easter. And it was this year, that year right before Easter, this guy was going to come out with this major news. And it was promoting this show that they will have on one of these National Geographic or the History Channel or something. And he was going to prove that he found the tomb of guess who? Right before Easter.
Jesus.
And it was not empty. And sitting in this Bible study with these men, this one particular guy, been in church his whole life as far as I know. I remember being a little kid, seeing him in church, very active, prominent member of the church, very, very faithful guy and doing stuff for the church. And he expressed serious doubts about the truth of Christianity just based on the idea of what this commercial was putting out there. Well, maybe we won't need to worry about this Bible study stuff so much after this show, as if it had some legitimacy, which it had none. Had none. Zeros. None. But this is the mere thought. I was sitting in another Bible study with a longtime church member, another church in Pilot Mountain that I was helping serve for a little while, and one of the longtime members there, very active guy, older fellows, probably late 70s and early 80s, and we were doing this Bible study, and he also expressed those same skeptical doubts. But it's not just among people in the congregation and the people sitting in the pews. Sometimes it's even the people in the pulpit that have major doubts. Right before Easter, just a few years ago, a pastor in my area that I was serving right before I moved here, he put this article out by a lady, actually it was a sermon she did by a lady named Barbara Brown Taylor, and Barbara Brown Taylor was telling the story of the resurrection from John, and her intent, it was obvious, her intent was to leave people and to promote doubt among people. And she was using this passage from the Gospel of John toward the end, John's resurrection story, and then the story of Thomas. And she was trying to paint the picture of, well, they were just trying to interpret something that happened after Jesus died, and it wasn't really solid, and it wasn't really confirmed. And we'll get into more of this about the resurrection and what that really means later in our time together. But she was promoting doubt. I mean, there's one even, there's an article I saw a couple of weeks ago. There's this prominent blogger she's a member of the Episcopal Church now, but she's a very popular blogger among a lot of people in Methodist churches and Lutheran mainline churches. And there's just this satire blogger, this blogger sort of poking fun at some of her beliefs, but saying she had a momentary lapse of doubt, and it was like this amazing thing. She had a momentary lapse of doubt, but she got over it real quick because faith was really too scary for her. She wanted to get back to doubt real quick. That was the joke. So even from the pulpit, sometimes this notion of we want to promote doubt. The Gospel of John says the direct opposite. The Gospel of John, the writer John says, I have written these things so that you may what? Believe. That you may believe. And that through believing you may have life. Through believing in His name. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him, right? Whoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. And here, whoever believes in Me shall never die. I'm the resurrection and I'm the life. Do you believe this? John wants to move us from doubt to faith. Think about the story of Thomas. The famous story of Thomas. What's Thomas's nickname?
The doubt.
Doubting Thomas. But doubting Thomas became believing Thomas. And then after that story, John goes on to say, and Jesus there says, and blessed are those who believe even though they don't see. They'll be even more blessed. He is encouraging us and trying to move us from doubt to faith, and in some circles and some pulpits they're trying to move us the opposite way. But we want to come to a place of faith and understanding. Now there's other times where we have people that they will, in the church, they want to promote this idea that, well, and this is among lay people a lot of times, in the pews, people in the pews. Well, we just don't want to question, we've always believed and we just don't want to question anything. So we just take it on faith, but they don't really have faith that seeks understanding. And the Bible tells us to grow in wisdom and knowledge. It tells us to seek and understand why it is we believe what we believe. Yeah, we begin with faith even when we don't understand, but we're called to grow in that faith and to seek understanding. Not to be complacent, not to try to bury your head in the sand, and not to deal with the difficult issues, because there are difficult issues. There's just difficult things that come up, difficult questions, things that we all have to wrestle with. So we want to get to this place where we can decide whether we really and truly do believe. And knowing that belief, that faith, and it's not just believing, that God exists. That's what John Wesley would call the faith of devils. So what? He would say. The devils believe, and that's what James said. They know there's a God, and there are people who believe there's a God. They don't want to get too specific about it. But we want to move from faith in the specific God who's revealed in Scripture. So, a lot of times there's this idea that, well, you just have to be some kind of nincompoop to believe this stuff. You can't be anybody that's really smart or educated and really believe this stuff. Well, there's a guy named Nicky Gumbel. It's a man named Nicky, but he's from England. Apparently a guy named Nicky's not that big of a deal over there. May not be here either. I don't know. It sounds a little strange to me, but anyway, Nicky was in college and was trained to be a lawyer. And he had some friends they used to hang out with, had a great time with, and he discovered that they became Christians. And he was appalled. He couldn't believe it. He says, have they lost their mind? He said, they must be crazy. They must have gone mad. Remember, mad, sad, or bad? They must have gone crazy. He knew they weren't bad. He said, they must have gone crazy. I've got to help them. So Nicky set out to be able to go and talk to them so he could help them come out of this delusion that they found themselves in. So he began to study so he could go and talk to them and talk them out of this nonsense. Well, as Nicky began to read and as he began to study, and especially as he began to read the New Testament, something amazing happened. He came to believe that it is true that this really happened. That this Jesus was really Lord. And he was born again. And he's done a ministry ever since. Even though he was a trained lawyer. I can't remember what school he went to over there, but he's done this ministry in a church of Holy Trinity or something like that in England. And he's got this fantastic ministry called the Alpha Course. And it's designed similar to this to help introduce people to the Christian faith and to grow in the Christian faith. And he's got countless thousands and millions all over the world that have been blessed and come to know Christ through his ministry. There's a guy who he found out his wife, he came home and found out his wife had become a Christian. She had gone to some revival meeting, and lo and behold, she came home and she was a Christian, a born-again Christian. Oh my goodness, he had been a Yale-trained lawyer, and he was working for the Chicago Tribune, and he was doing research articles and things like that for the Chicago Tribune. And he's like, I've got to help my wife. I've got to help her out. She's lost her mind. He begins to study, and he begins to do research so he can show to her how silly and stupid this really is. And in that same process, through the research he was doing, he came to see there's more to this than I ever imagined. And he too became a believer. And now he's got a great ministry. He actually teaches at Houston Baptist Seminary. And he's written several books. And I'm going to commend these books to you, not only for yourself, but you can refer other people who have maybe really serious questions and really serious doubts. But his name's Lee Strobel. And Lee has done a lot of these kinds of books. He's got this one, The Case for Faith, and he answers many of the objections that skeptics like he at one time had. And he goes through, what about suffering? Why would we say Jesus is the only way? Is that offensive? There's different things. The Case for Christ. And there's other things and other materials that he's done. He's got a website. I commend this to you so you have the resources that you need, not only for yourself, but to be able to refer other people. He gives good, basic, genuine, heartfelt answers from the top-notch biblical scholars, evangelical biblical scholars, all over the country, and some all over the world. So I commend that to you. But when he began to really look into it, in order to disprove it, he came to believe with all of his heart that it is true. That it is true. I can think of many other examples. There's a guy named Matthew Sleeth. He's done a lot of work on the Sabbath, but he was an agnostic, and he was an ER doctor. And he just began to feel compelled to search for spiritual truth because he was empty inside. He had all the things that money could buy, but he was empty inside. And he began to search different religions, and he just picked up a Gideon's Bible from the hospital. Began to read. And he came to believe. Even though he was comparing Buddhism and Hinduism and all kinds, he was reading all kinds of stuff, and he came to believe that Jesus Christ truly is Lord and God, the way, the truth, and the life. Now, he's got a fantastic ministry where he helps others to live into the faith once for all delivered to the saints. There's a guy, sometimes you'll hear people say, well, you can't be scientific in Christian. You just can't be, but you got to be one or the other. You're either scientist and scientifically minded, or you're religious and Christian, but you can't be both. There's a guy named Alistair McGrath, one I just mentioned a little bit ago. And Alistair was a socialist. He was raised in a socialist family. He was a staunch atheist. That pretty much has been part of socialism from the very beginning. And anyway, he thought you just had to be silly or stupid or just ignorant to believe in Christianity. And what he came to realize was that he had just as much of a faith himself, that he wasn't really challenging and questioning himself as Christians have, and even more so. And he began to turn his skeptical lens away from the Christian faith for a little bit and turned it in on his own belief system. And he began to question and examine why it is he believed what he believed as an atheist, and comparing it to some things he began to look at in Christianity. And it was really science that really got him to really start thinking about this. So he's got a PhD. He's like super duper genius guy, but he's got a PhD in molecular biophysics. I can barely even say it. He's got a PhD in theology. He's got a PhD in history, specifically focused on the intellectual thought throughout history, the way people have thought about things throughout history. He's got 3 PhDs. He's no slouch. But through his research, and he was surprised when he began to study life and the universe, that he began to just question this idea that all of this that we see, and this is a prominent, this is the standard belief system. This is the belief system you have to have in colleges and universities for the most part today. To have a job on staff as a faculty person, as a professor, is that everything came out of absolutely nothing by accident and for no reason at all. Just happenstance. And he believed that, but he began to question that, and it was the study of life and the universe that began to help him to see this couldn't have been just one big accident for no reason. A lot of scientists have come to realize that as well. It's just too incredibly difficult to explain this. I was listening to a guy, actually just this afternoon, he was talking about how in a lot of circles now, in scientific circles, they have realized there's not enough time for everything to, like we had thought, for everything to just develop all by accident. There's not enough time in this universe for that to have happened. Because this is the one thing that scientists do now. And this is important. This is important for your kids and for your grandkids. But this is one thing that scientists do know now, is that up until probably the late 50s, early 60s, most scientists, if you were to ask most scientists in 1950, how old is the universe, they'd looked at you like you were loopy. Because the standard answer to that question was, well, the universe doesn't have an age. It's eternal. But the vast majority, overwhelming majority now know that the universe had a beginning. Hello? Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it was science that began to help Alistair McGrath begin to question this atheistic belief that he'd come to, and to begin to really dig into things. And he too became a Christian. And now he's a wonderful defender of the Christian faith and stands up against bullies like Richard Dawkins and others who were militant atheists, who were trying to impose this on our whole country and our whole society, who are actually seeking to have Christians marginalized from polite society. That's, if y'all didn't know that was happening, that is happening right before our eyes. So there are reasons to believe. There are plenty of reasons to believe. Now, my story is a little bit different. I grew up in the church, but I began to have my doubts about the Christian faith. I don't know that I ever didn't really believe in a God at all, or a designer or a creator. I never got to that point, I don't think, in my life. But I wasn't sure about this Christian thing. And by the time I went to college, I wasn't really paying much attention to Christianity and my Christian faith that I'd been raised in at all. I pretty much was ignoring it. But I was having moments where I would begin to question and wonder, And then I would be in those moments where people would challenge the Christian faith, or begin to mock it, and ridicule it, and make fun of it, and then something would well up within me and say, oh, wait a minute. I don't know about that. Wait a minute. I don't like what you're saying. And then, I began to wonder, is this just because of the way I was raised, or what is this? And I began to seek and I began to search myself. And I was drinking and doing some drugs and stuff like that. And I started going to church. I started going to little campus Christian meetings. I went to a Roman Catholic church. I went to a Seventh-day Adventist church. I went to a Methodist church, a Baptist church, a non-denominational church. And I was doing this little searching thing, a lot of times with a hangover on Sunday morning. And really was feeling like I was missing something, but couldn't quite put my finger on it, but so on and so forth. But anyway, I got a knock at the door, and lo and behold, before I knew it, long story short, I ended up in a little cult group in college called the Way International. And it was a group that I would learn and came to believe what they taught, that denied many of the tenets of the Christian faith to make it more reasonable, to make it more rational in some way. And I bought into a lot of what they were teaching, what they were talking about. And I was adamantly opposed to traditional Christianity. I was a militant, outspoken person against traditional Christianity, people in churches. And really got deep into this group. But God began to work on me and work in my life. And I found out in a lot of these stories that I've told you, these people I've told you about, there was somebody in the background in their lives who was, guess what? Praying for them. And my mom knew I was lost. She knew I was lost. She prayed fervently, intensely for me for over 10 years, along with a lot of other people from my home church, a lot of people in my community, a lot of churches of people who knew me as a kid and who knew what I was involved with. God was working in me, working on me, working on my wife and Christy, really trying to bring us to a different place in our lives. And I've shared the story here at the church, how I got to the place where I didn't think anything could get any worse. It seemed like when everything was supposed to be falling into place, everything was falling apart. The wheels were coming off everything. And we found ourselves in the midst of this emergency operating room over here in Winston-Salem with Christy having an emergency C-section, our third child. It was actually on her due date. And we knew there was a major serious crisis. We didn't know exactly what was going on, but by the time they got this baby delivered, the baby was dead. Unbeknownst to my wife, I could tell right away something wasn't right. We knew something was wrong because the baby wasn't crying. I got up in the middle of this operating room over there in Winston, and I looked at that baby, and she was laying there on that table, and they were trying to work on her, just about ready to give up. She was as blue as a Smurf. And it was just like, what? Just a ton of bricks falling. When you didn't think it could get much worse. And it's a long story. I can't get into. I won't get into all that. And I've told some of it, and I've written about some of it. But it was a place in my life where I realized where I thought I had all the answers, and I thought I had it all figured out. I realized I didn't have a business class. And I was in serious need. And my wife's looking at me, and she's crying out, Cliff, what is wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong with the baby? And I walked back to Chrissy, and I just grabbed her hand. And at that moment, my prayer was this: God, be merciful to me, a sinner. That was my prayer. I finally got to the point where I'm all out of the answers I thought I had. I'm all out of the reliance on this great faith, and that's a whole other story that I thought I had. I was realizing more and more I was relying on my own faith and my own faith, not my faith in God. And there's a big difference. And I just cried out, and Christy said she didn't know what was going on. She just said, God, help my baby, whatever it is. And at that moment, in that exact moment, not a little before, not a little after, but in that exact moment, that baby was revived. And the doctor who delivered her, the doctor who was in the operating room right there, he initially said, look, I don't know what's happened here, but I felt the presence of God immediately. And I knew something miraculous and awesome had happened in a way I couldn't explain, and I didn't ask for it. That was the other kicker. I didn't even ask for it, much less believe or have some kind of positive thinking guru stuff going on. And that was a lesson to me on the mercy of God, the grace of God. But immediately, I knew something special had happened, and Anna, she was looking at me. She had her head turned as they were wheeling her out, and I could see her beautiful blue eyes. All 5 of my rascals. We've had 5 blue-eyed rascals in a row. And she was looking at me as they were wheeling her away, just had come out of being dead. No heartbeat, no breathing. What do y'all call that? It's dead. They wheeled her away. She's looking at me. Like she's responding to my voice because I was saying, honey, everything's going to be okay. I didn't know why I was even saying it. And in that room at that time, there was this woman standing behind Christy, kind of elevated, it seemed like, and there was a bright light shining on her, it seemed like to me, and she was assuring us that everything was going to be okay. Although the doctor who delivered her said, I don't think she's going to make it. This woman would say, everything's going to be okay. There are going to be churches and people praying for you. All over the state, she said. I think she mentioned Virginia. And we went and talked to the doctor, and that's when he told us he didn't think she was going to make it. He didn't know what had happened, but didn't think she was going to make it. Next day he comes and says, well, looks like she's going to make it. But you need to be prepared to have a special needs child because this has been too long without oxygen. So we had social workers coming to prepare us to have a special needs child. Well, long story short, within 2 weeks we checked out of this NICU at Forsyth Medical Center, and the doctor who checked her out says she checks out just like any normal newborn. And it truly was the miracle that this nurse and I discussed. As we wept, she wept, I wept over Anna's incubator as we were looking at it together, and she was just sobbing saying, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. The point of this is it set me on a new course, and it caused me to begin to really start to reevaluate what I had come to believe. I really was filled with doubt. I will talk about all this great faith, but I was really skeptical of the Scriptures. I wouldn't accept them for the way they were. I had to twist them and distort them to put them on my own terms in many different ways. And I realized, because with this group we'd been involved with, they were militantly against the Trinity, against the divinity of Christ, and all so on and so forth, all this stuff that are major tenets and doctrines of the Christian faith. And I began to reevaluate that. I began to reconsider that and re-examine, and I began to read the Bible without those rose-colored glasses that I had for a while, and to try to let it speak for itself. And I began to compare and contrast things. But anyway, long story short, at a certain point, several weeks, many weeks, several months after this happened with Anna, sitting there on the couch in my living room reading through Philippians chapter 2, and all of a sudden the light came on. And I accepted Christ for who He truly is. And I surrendered and submitted myself to Him. And I put my faith, and I put my trust in Him. I surrendered my life to Him, and I entrusted my life to Him. That's what faith really is. That's what faith really is. And it changed my life. And it changed my family's life. And it's changed the lives of a few other people along the way as God has worked through me to teach and to preach and to share these things and to share this testimony. Faith is like this. Plenty of reasons to believe. Plenty of reasons to believe. There's a guy who's standing on the cliff looking over Niagara Falls. There's a tightrope stretched across one side, from one side to the other. And he looks down on this crowd that's there to watch him walk across this tightrope, and he looks down and he says, "Do you believe that I can walk across this tightrope?" And they were kind of hesitantly, but cheered him on. "Yeah, go for it. Yeah. So he goes across from one side to the other on this tightrope across Niagara Falls, and he gets to the other side, and he looks down at the crowd again, and he says, "Do you believe that I can walk across this tightrope?" And they say, "Of course. Wow, awesome. Look what you just did. Yes, we believe." So then he got a guy to give him a wheelbarrow. He said, "Do you believe I could push this wheelbarrow across this tightrope?" And they were cheering him on. They thought, "Sure, yeah." He did it. He went from one side to the other pushing the wheelbarrow. And he got to the other side, and he had a partner. And he looked down at the crowd, and he said, "Do you think I can push this guy in this wheelbarrow? If he gets in, I can push him across this tightrope." And they were like, "Whoa, man." But yeah, he did it. And he got to the other side. He says, "Now, do you really believe I can push somebody in a wheelbarrow across this tightrope?" And they were cheering. They were going crazy. "Of course, you just did it. Wow." He said, "Okay, who's next? Who's next?"
Yeah.
Faith is getting in the wheelbarrow and realizing that it's Jesus Christ who's going to push you across this tightrope from this world to the next, and trusting that He can get you to the other side. That's faith. That's wholehearted surrender. It's not mentalist sin. It's not the faith of a demon. That's wholehearted faith and trust. That's moving from doubt to genuine faith. And through our next several weeks together, I hope that's where we all move. Further and further into faith and further away from doubt. Trusting in the things that God has revealed to us through His Son, Jesus Christ, in the pages of Holy Scripture, as we all grow together and see others grow in the faith and the grace and the knowledge of Jesus.